Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host on the weekends, Jake Daly, alongside my good friend and co-host, Mayrev Fatemi. We got two more segments for y'all today on this Saturday, June 14th. And I think next we should talk about Kevin Durant and what's going to happen here with the Phoenix Suns and Kevin Durant. Could he really be on the move? And I saw today that could Minnesota actually be a landing spot for Kevin Durant? Mayor, what do you kind of think about Kevin Durant being on the move potentially and Minnesota being a landing spot, or some of these other teams in the NBA? Who could you see being a landing spot for Kevin Durant? It looks as if there's some breaking news here. I don't know. I could be wrong.
You're wrong. I'm sorry. I actually thought I saw something about the New York Knicks, and I jumped at my phone so quickly. I'm so sorry.
We were so close to getting some breaking news in here on the GSMC Sports Podcast, but that's okay. We're on it for next time. We are primed and ready to give you the latest and greatest breaking news here. But let's focus back in on Kevin Durant, and what do you think could potentially happen here with KD? Do you think, first of all, he could potentially be on the move, and then could Minnesota be a landing spot, or where else could you think Kevin Durant could actually end up at?
Well, I'm 100% sure he's on the move. He's going to get traded this summer. It's going to happen. There's no maybe. There's no ifs and buts about it. The Phoenix Suns are ready to move off of Kevin Durant. That's first. Second, it was reported yesterday, I saw this, that this could be, expect this to happen within the next few days to a week. This is how quickly that this is going to happen. This is something that was already reported to happen before the NBA draft, and this fits right with that timetable, with the draft coming right around the corner before the end of the month. There are two teams right now that got reported today, according to Jake Fisher with ESPN, or his Bleacher Report, excuse me, that it looks like the two most likely landing spots right now are the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Miami Heat. Those are the two places that are on the top of the list in terms of trade destinations for Kevin Durant. I'll get into Miami first, just because I'm going to leave Minnesota for the end. Miami, I would like to see him there. I think not only will it help Tyler Hero grow into a better scorer, he's already a phenomenal scorer, but we're waiting to see Tyler Hero take that next step into being a leader on the team. I think he's around he's around Jalen Williams level. I would say he's a little bit higher than that, but he's around that 25 points a game scorer. I would say Jalen Williams is closer to 15 without SGA in the lineup. Hero's closer to 2025, but I think Kevin Durant will do wonders for his career, not only to be a mentor from Kevin Durant, but just be able to grow as a secondary scorer and continue to grow into that primary scorer eventually after Kevin Durant leaves. It would put Miami back into that conversation as one of the top tier teams in the Eastern Conference, and I think he would thrive with Eric Spoelstra. Eric Spoelstra, they might butt heads a little bit, and those are two personalities that you would see on paper could butt heads a little bit. Pat Riley as well. But if there's a guy that could get Kevin Durant under control and that could just have him sit there and come in, play basketball, and leave, it's Eric Spoelstra. And he will build that team. He will build that scheme around Kevin Durant. So that's first. I'll say that first. It would make Miami one of the top. I would put them probably fourth behind the or third without Jason Tatum healthy. I'd put them third behind the Celtics, but I'd put the Knicks and the Pacers ahead of them. Now let's get into the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm shocked that the Timberwolves are even this far in. I thought the Spurs and the Knicks would be ahead of them, but the fact that the Timberwolves are here, I am beyond happy, because this is the place where I wanted to see Kevin Durant go to. Can you imagine Kevin Durant and Anthony Edwards on the same team? Anthony Edwards has already brought the Timberwolves to a Western Conference final. Anthony Edwards has already back-to-back Western Conference finals. Anthony Edwards has already been the legend killer, took out Kevin Durant 2 years ago in the first round of the playoffs, has already been one of those top premier guys and is already being named or kind of given some of the spot put into serious consideration as the next face of the NBA. Pair him up with Kevin Durant. I think that would be phenomenal. That would be a phenomenal pairing of those two. And if they can keep Julius Randle, if they can keep that core, if they can bring in a Naz Reid, I think Naz Reid would take a little bit of a pay cut to play on that team as well. I think Naz Reid's looking to get paid, but if he can stay on the team and if the Timberwolves can stay competitive, I would not be shocked if Naz Reid decides to stay. Keep Mike Conley, have Jaden McDaniels continue to prosper on that team, even though I don't think they would be able to keep him. In my estimation, if we are looking legitimately at a trade with the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Suns and the Timberwolves, I think ideally they lose Gobert and McDaniels and most likely a first-round pick in that deal for KD. And I think that would actually really work in favor of the Suns too, because it would give the Suns some defensive presence and it would help the Timberwolves. And honestly, it would probably propel them to their first NBA Finals of their young career or young franchise career in the NBA.
Yeah, I think Minnesota's certainly an interesting option. Jackrabbit73 from YouTube said KD needs to go somewhere where he's the number one option. Heat makes sense for that reason. Minnesota doesn't really with Anthony Edwards. I tend to agree kind of with that thinking. I just think Kevin Durant, we've seen him want to be the number one option throughout his NBA career. That's kind of been something that's really been important for him. Besides those couple years with Golden State where he was kind of ring chasing, after joining a team where they break the wins record and you join that team, I think it's pretty clear what you're trying to do at that point. But besides that, Kevin Durant's kind of been a guy where he needs to be the number one option. I just think that's the one question mark I have with Minnesota. And that's also why, despite what Jake Fisher said, I think Houston still does make a lot of sense. I could see what he was saying where Houston doesn't really want to accelerate their rebuild. They have a lot of guys that are 25 and younger. But you have that team in Houston, that second, third best record in the Western Conference this year. You have a really young core. You give them a Kevin Durant, a guy that can be that alpha for those young guys, can be a guy to look up to for one of the Thompsons, Reed Shepherd, some of these young, Jabari Smith Jr., some of these younger guys. You have him, first of all, as that number one option, and then as a mentor to some of these younger guys too. I think Houston is a very viable landing spot, despite maybe they don't want to accelerate their rebuild that much. I don't think there's that much downside to adding Kevin Durant compared to some of these other franchises.
I see what you mean 100%. And I really, going back to what you said with him struggling, not being a number one option on a team, that is very valid and that is very true. But we did kind of see him starting to play off of Devin Booker this year, and they kind of really did prosper with one another. The problem with the Suns is that they didn't have a team to build around those two guys. On top of that, they had negative defense, and they were giving up, I think, 120, 130 points a game. Those two things taken into account, that is the reason why the Phoenix Suns struggled as much as they did. I think if he can take that role that he did with the Suns and replicate that with Anthony Edwards, I really think the Minnesota Timberwolves could be a team to be reckoned with. That's easier said than done, but I could see him doing so. He did it with Steph Curry. He did it with Devin Booker. He took a little bit of a starting role with the Brooklyn Nets, but that was granted, especially with Kyrie and James Harden. You're going to be the leader of that team with those two guys. I think this is Anthony Edwards' team. I think the team is built in a way where Kevin Durant can just be an offensive threat, which is exactly what you want. If he can continue to show up for 20 points a game and be a legitimate number two option, Julius Randle can fall to a number three, continue to get some offensive production, but doesn't need to be doesn't grab as much attention from the defense, from opposing defenses, I think that would be really crucial for him to continue to prosper in that role. And Jaden McDaniels can fall away from that number 3 option. Jaden McDaniels really is, if Jaden McDaniels can focus on the defensive end and then sporadically, the same way Obi Toppin does, be one of those Indiana Pacers guys that shows up and gives you 20 points on any given night, 30 points sometimes, the way Jaden McDaniels knows he can, but focus and lock into the defensive end of the ball. I think that would do wonders for him because that is what he does best. He's a defensive guru. If he can focus on that end of the ball, he's fine. It's when you mix him up to the offensive end and you want him the same way that he was in the playoffs this year. They wanted him especially after that Lakers series, the way that he showed up. They wanted him to take that number 3 option, sometimes that number 2 when Julius Randle was having bad games. That doesn't happen for a guy. That doesn't work for a guy like Jaden McDaniels. Similarly to I'm going to tie this to Boston, same way it didn't work for Marcus Smart when he started to take a starting point guard role for them. He's a defensive guy. He's not offensive. If you mix them both, it doesn't work. It just ruins both sides of the ball. Let him focus on the defensive end. Bringing KD in would take a lot of pressure not only off Anthony Edwards but the rest of the team. It just depends on how he fits into that offense. Can he take that number 2 role? That's the question.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting situation. And one thing I kind of thought about was once Kevin Durant does get moved, is this kind of officially the end of the big 3 type era where you're able to have 3 guys on big time deals? We saw Phoenix try to do that with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, and that completely crippled this team with the presence of the second apron. They weren't able to add any depth. They couldn't aggregate contracts on trades. I think that's going to be another really interesting piece of this puzzle is once Kevin Durant gets moved, is that kind of the end of the big 3 type era? Because with these new financial restrictions, I think it's certainly very possible that that's the case. Even Boston right now, they're going to have to pretty much reconfigure their entire roster this year because they're facing over $500 million in terms of luxury tax. I think that's kind of an underappreciated storyline here is the moving into a new era where there's not a huge big 3. And personally, I'm a really big fan of that. I think it's more fun when you only have 1 or 2 stars and you have a little more parity and a little more depth involved. And it just makes the product on the court better. But Minnesota, it's certainly very intriguing if Kevin Durant does end up there. Could we see him kind of replace Miami or Jimmy Butler in Miami? Could we see him take over this young Houston team? They're all certainly viable options. We're just going to have to see where Kevin Durant does go. But I think one thing is clear. We will not see Kevin Durant in a Phoenix Suns uniform this upcoming season. Right now, we're going to take our last break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Club World Cup. I don't know if Merab wanted to talk about something else, but if he did, we're going to talk about it tomorrow because the 2 of us are back here again tomorrow night. So stick with us. We'll be right back. And we're going to close out the show by talking about some soccer on the GSMC Sports Podcast.